Welcome to Single Parent Success Stories, a podcast designed to inspire single parents. Here you'll find resources from self-care to finances to parenting and everything in between. Discover what it takes to thrive. Let the stories inspire you to what is possible. Before we start the next conversation, I want to invite you to check out my amazing book, The Gift Inside, a powerful guide for healing your body, mind, and soul. Reclaim your strengths and awaken your true potential. Whether you are navigating heartbreak or simply seeking deeper fulfillment, this book offers the tools to turn your struggles into triumphs. It is time to unlock the gift within you. Available now on Amazon, or you can check it out on my website www.irinashehovtsov.com. Hello and welcome to Single Parent Success Stories. Today we have a special guest, Dr. Nigel Brayer. He is a former single parent. He's also a practicing healthcare provider in the functional medicine alternative field the last 28 years, and he's a father of 4 healthy, well-adjusted humans. Welcome, Dr. Nigel. It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you, Irina. I appreciate this opportunity to have a discussion.
Yeah, so thank you. So please share with us, how did you become a single parent?
Interesting story, Irina, is like most people, I got married, or several people, I got married young, and you have all of these wonderful ideas and ambitions and preconceptions, and then, life comes along, and obviously things start to evolve differently. So I find it interesting is a lot of things that we're totally blind to in our youth become blatantly evident as we get older and start living life and having children and such as that. So anyway, I just find it interesting how I guess love is blind, which should be, which is good, but also things start to become more real as you live life. So. My wife and I, of 8-9 years, we divorced. She had a lot of challenges, and of course, all things have 2 sides to every story, of course. So that kind of had a big change in our life, and we divorced after almost 10 years of marriage. And I guess the challenging part of all that started after that. And so from everything to, shared parenting to juggling and trying to raise children that weren't totally messed up because their houses were different. And of course, that's a challenge for all single parents. It's like, okay, how do you manage that? How do you raise children? How do you teach them responsibility? Our situation is they were with me 1 week and they were with their mother 1 week. So how do you manage so that you don't have children that want to run away from their problems when one house is full of abundance and another house is full of more reality? So I think all single parents deal with that. Is we all want our children to be healthy. We all want them to be responsible, well-adjusted adults. And we're all doing our best, but that's probably the toughest part. Obviously when a marriage ends, that's challenging for everybody involved. But the children's really the one that we all think about the most and again, there's no right or wrong. It's just do your best and try not to beat yourself up too bad otherwise. So yeah, that was a big challenge, and it's still challenging. My older children are in their 20s now, and it, not to sound negative, but it never stops. The dynamics that have been established continue on. They're just now adults. So, but do your best and smile.
I love that attitude, and you're right. Yeah, challenges that don't end; they just change and they evolve as kids grow older, as we grow older, and how we respond to life.
Yeah, and I think actually, sorry to interrupt, Irina, but one thing I do think is really important for people to look is I have a really deep respect for stepmothers. My wife of 12 years now, she really got most of the crap. And it really saddens me because, there's a lot of different ego things that play a role, but stepmoms, I think, really get the short end of the stick. They're always the easy target to blame everything on, and they're always the easy target for, the ex-spouse. I call it Mama Bear. Mama Bear, when she feels threatened, does all sorts of crazy stuff. And so, and the stepmother is an easy one to put all that stuff on too. So my heart goes out to stepmoms out there because they've got a big burden to bear. And thank you.
Totally, yes, I get that. What helped you kept sanity intact, and what would you recommend for single parents on the journey now?
I think the biggest thing is I remarried 4 or 5 years after being a single parent. Um, and obviously I was quite a bit older when I remarried the second time. I think keeping that strong, your personal relationship, I think second marriages even have, I'm not a big statistics guy, but second marriages generally have a higher, breakup rate than first marriages. And I can understand why, because there's a lot of dynamics that are outside of your personal control. So not only do you have two individuals that have to, figure themselves out together, but then you have what's called a silent partner, which isn't in your house, and that's the other parents that no longer are part of your life, but still have a great influence on how things work. So I'd say the biggest thing is take time and effort to build your new relationship, not at the expense of your children, but if you're going to be able to move forward, you need two people that can communicate. And it's not easy. We used a lot of counseling and used professionals to help us navigate. And I can see why people run away and leave because sometimes that appears easier. But my perspective is God always puts in front of you what you need to learn and grow from. So if you run away from this one, it'll show up with a different face somewhere else. So I'm a big believer in is overcome your own ego self and grow with the person you're with because there might be different faces, but we're all the same. Just have different idiosyncrasies. So
You're so right. We all have our own cockroaches in our head.
yes, agreed. So, and I think that acknowledgement's a big deal. Yeah, children are important, but children are very smart too. They know, and I don't mean this in a real negative way, but a child will always choose candy over healthy food, right? Well, it goes the same with what they want. It's like, hey, if I know I get what I want over here, then I'm going to go over there, even though we as parents know that's not best for them. But as a person meets someone else and they grow a relationship together, is having that strong and healthy really is one of the biggest things. And that was something my wife Brandy and I talk about now. It's like our best proclamation is our demonstration. So as we show and live and communicate with each other, your children learn from that. It's more impactful than the words that you say, right? So
Yeah,
that's a big one.
totally.
Yeah.
All right, thank you. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and talk about your career, about your wellness journey, and how you've been in alternative medicine, and how did you discover that, and what kind of led you on that path?
Sure. Well, it started a long time ago. I grew up in Canada and I was a hockey player. And I broke my leg years ago. I probably was in my middle teens. I played hockey in college. And after I'd broken my leg, about a year later, I started getting severe chronic knee pain on the opposite leg that I'd broken, where I went from being very active to really not being able to walk at all. And that went on for a couple of years. I was in the middle of college, and my goal was to be a primary care physician, like family practice. And I was, subject to go to the University of British Columbia for undergrad or for graduate school in medicine. But I had this chronic knee pain where I just couldn't even walk. And so I went on this whole path of trying to discover where the pain was coming from, and no doctors could figure it out. I went to orthopedists. They thought at one time I had osteosarcoma, which is a bone cancer, where they did biopsies because my knee just kept getting bigger on the side. Nobody could figure it out. They didn't know what was going on, and I was supposed to start my medical school training, but I really couldn't walk. So, interestingly enough, I grew up on a cattle ranch in Western Canada, and there was this kind of quacky old doctor that, only the worst people would, only the worst cases would go see. And my mom said, "Hey, why don't you go see Dr. Jones?" I'm like, "All right, well, he's kind of strange. Why do I want to see him? All these really expensive doctors, and I call them the Crystal Palaces, they couldn't figure it out. So how could he?" And so I went in there, and I was probably about 20 or 21 years old at this time, and literally within 5 minutes, he said, "Oh," he goes, "your one leg is like an inch and a half shorter than the other one." I'm, "What are you talking about?" He goes, "Well, let's take an x-ray and take a look." So he took an x-ray, and he said, "Well, the reason your knee hurts is because you got an inch and a half difference." He goes, how is that shorter?" He goes, "Did you break your leg?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I broke it a couple years ago." He goes, "Well, I think it stunted the growth plate, and now your one leg is so much shorter than the other, it's causing all this stress on your knee." He adjusted my spine. He gave me a shoe wedge to put in my shoe, and literally 3 to 4 years of pain went away in about 3 weeks. And so I was kind of at like a personal dilemma. I'm like, okay, well, I had all of this, and obviously youth is very naive. So I thought, well, hey, all these people know the answers in the Crystal Palaces. That was my belief. And then I went to this guy in this rickety old house. That was his practice, and he figured it out in 10 minutes. And I thought, well, this is a problem. So, so I quickly had to shift gears, and so I ended up becoming a chiropractor. That was my kind of my first focus of opening up the door to understanding that what you often are led to believe is not the truth. And so I became a chiropractor, and I practiced on the west coast of the United States for several years, and then I moved to the Midwest, Ohio, and it just through being married and having children and healthcare and an understanding of, not that I'm against medications, but most of the medications that we're exposed to, there's a deep vested interest in why they're there. And it's usually not for your health. It's usually for other reasons. So that led me to develop into using acupuncture and functional medicine and realizing, hey, the body is extremely powerful. Our goal is just to start removing the barriers that we put in front of it. And so as we remove the mental, physical, emotional, nutritional, chemical barriers, the body's design is pretty miraculous. So that's kind of the 7-cent version. And then I've obviously evolved that into bladder. For the last several years, I've focused on bladder health. And again, I'll call this a happy accident, but none of these things I've really chosen, but I go back to spirit as it's kind of led me in that direction. So I think about my knee, and that problem, which was so disruptive to my life at that time, was paramount into the direction of my life. If that wouldn't have occurred, I would probably be a medical physician sharing the flow charts that I was designed to tell people to do in this or that, and not to degrade that part of healthcare, which I'm a full advocate for, but it's very directed by others. So my life had shifted dramatically. So in terms of bladder, my wife, Brandy, after our child was born, Jude, she started having bladder issues, and I did what any spouse would do, said, hey, let's try to find an answer for this. And of course, we went through all the answers, and none of the answers worked. And then that kind of pushed me to realize, and I'll call this the selfish motive, is I didn't want my wife to stop living and functioning because of bladder health. But by default, that means I have to stop living and functioning because she's my partner. So out of pure self-preservation, I said, well, I need to figure this out because I don't want my wife to have to stop doing things that we both love. And I've just noticed that women's lives, and men too, of course, with this issue, but their lives become smaller and narrower because of it. And something that we take for granted, like the ability to hold our bladder, you realize if you can't do that, is your life changes. Your traveling changes, your activities change, your your embarrassment levels and your hiding shade, all those things become very, very front and center. So that led me to take my acupuncture and functional medicine training and research and start diving deep into, well, what controls the bladder? And obviously I learned all these things in anatomy and physiology, but I had to go a lot deeper. And I said, well, why don't these problems get resolved? I think the latest statistic is 75% of the women over the age of 45 have some form of urinary incontinence. This is really an epidemic problem, and the only way we know it's even happening, and I'm not a big TV watcher, but is if anyone watches TV and notices that almost a huge percentage of the commercials these days are for pads and for adult diapers. So clearly somebody has figured out that there's a problem there, but nobody has an answer. So with that in mind, I took my acupuncture training and functional medicine. I took a deep dive into the bladder and realized, and again, anyone can look this up, is the majority of the control of the bladder is what's called autonomically controlled. So for those out there, autonomic means it's like your heart. It's beating without you knowing it, and you don't have to think about it. It's happening. So what does that mean? Well, it means that your unconscious mind is controlling your heart. And so, well, the unconscious mind is controlling your bladder also. So you do have some control of it when you decide to go to the bathroom, but the tone itself has more to do with what's going on with you physiologically and subconsciously than it does with you being conscious of it right now. So what all that means is we're looking in the wrong direction for the solution. So when we look at things like, hey, let's do some Kegel exercises, which everybody's heard of, right? So I'm going to squeeze my sphincter, I'm going to try to build the pelvic floor muscles, and those are all well and good, but that only controls 30% of the tone of the bladder. So that means we're missing 70%. So, if I was a detective out there and I said, hey, there's a 70% chance this guy's the criminal, and there's a 30% chance this guy's the criminal, well, I'm going to probably go to the 70% first, and then the 30% second, right? Well, we're going to the 30% first, and then we're wondering why it's not actually being affected. So long story short is I started changing and said, okay, how do we influence the autonomic nervous system? How do we balance these unconscious stressors that are influencing all of us? And when I started doing that, and I started using patients in my practice as, I'll say, guinea pigs, but they were happy guinea pigs because the option to get help was pretty awesome. And what I found over a couple year period is we had about a 95% success rate with these ladies who've had incontinence, some for years, some as a result of surgery. I had a couple patients who had uterine cancer, who had their uterus removed as scar tissue. So we found that people, no matter what the issue, would get improvement. Not all people would resolve entirely, but everybody improved when we started to rebalance not only the pelvis, the musculature, but also the autonomic nervous system, which was really exciting. And so I took all of that and I said, well, and I asked several of my patients, I said, well, what kept you from getting this help or any help before? And they said, well, some had seen their doctors and they had been prescribed certain medications and such, but they said it was embarrassing and it was expensive and there wasn't a lot of good options. So I thought, well, can I take this program and make it super simple that people can do at home? They don't have to have conversations that are uncomfortable, and they don't have to break the bank to do it. So I came up with what's called the Ironclad Bladder Program. And what that program does is simply it just leads them through all the things that we did successfully in our practice in the office, with all of the outcome measures, with all of the autonomic retraining, using acupuncture and nutrition, and using biofeedback techniques, and they can do it at home. So I wanted to be able to bring it to others so they can do it at home. Kind of cool.
Incredible.
Yeah.
I love it how kind of your personal story led you onto that path. Like you said, there is no coincidences in life. Those kind of, you led to something different, just like with your knee and then your wife, and you got to explore all those things. So what women can do? What is the simplest thing women can do in getting on a better route, I guess?
Sure. So the very first thing that I like people to think about is we can't change something we're not aware of, right? So people can see their problem, say, okay, I can't control my bladder or whatever the issue is. It doesn't really matter. But I like this analogy when it comes to money. Is, Irina, if you had a friend who said, Irina, I am totally broke. I don't have any money. Help me figure this out. And the first thing you're going to say after you ponder it a minute is you're probably going to say, well, friend, what are you spending your money on? And he or she's going to say, well, I don't know. And then, of course, you're going to say, well, let's start paying attention. And then same thing, they start write down every nickel you spend every day for a week. And then let's talk about it at the end of the week. And then you're going to sit down with them and you're going to say, okay, well, let's start here. Well, that $9 cup of coffee you're buying every day, well, let's start with that one. That's a pretty good idea. That 9 times 7, that's going to save you quite a few bucks every week, right? So the same thing goes with your bladder. It's not a whole lot different. As people they think of the bladder as this isolated organ system. That's like saying your heart is an isolated organ. It's not, right? So it's really being impacted by all parts of your life. And one of the biggest parts I like people to look at is food. So what I'll have them do is start writing down everything that crosses their lips and how they feel, either mentally, emotionally, or physically, or how many times they leak. So I let people choose what they want to track, but I'll usually call it emotion of some sort. So I call it the food and mood journal. Everything that crosses your lips and how you feel, and rate that out of a 10 scale. 10 being the best day of your entire life, and 0 being the worst. And just pay attention to start understanding how what you eat and how you feel. And so I start with the emotions because that's a pretty easy one to pay attention to. I had a really crappy day, today was a 5. I had the best day, today was an 8. At the end of the week, you add up your score and you have an immediate marker. 70 in this example would be the highest. So today was a 70, or this week. Then start looking at the food and say, okay, well, we know that there's foods that heal and then there's foods that harm. And then you don't have to be genius to figure it out. Is the more a man puts his little finger on foods, the less healthy they're going to be. So the first step I encourage all people to do is start paying attention to their food and how they feel, and then make a small change. Now, is that going to take all years of bladder problems and resolve them, or health problems? The answer is no. But just like with your friend who's broke, you've just saved, $50-some a week by getting rid of a $9 cup of coffee and making it at home. So it's a first step, and I've noticed steps lead to next steps. And that's kind of where the Ironclad Bladder Program comes in, is that step, and what I just shared as part of that first step, is it starts to help make connections so that whatever a person would do along their path, we're building more and more momentum. And that's another thing that in all of healthcare that I share with patients that I see, we've all built momentum. And that momentum can be health momentum, that can be personal, occupational momentum, but you can't disregard the past for where you are right now. Now, we don't have to live in it and lament over it and feel guilty over it, but we do have to acknowledge that it's influencing us today, right? So whatever choice that we make to change, we have to build momentum in a new direction. And it starts with these little things, and they build and build and build and build, and the body responds to that. So as you start making small changes, then it's going to encourage you to take another step and another. The same things that get us into negative patterns get us into positive patterns, right? So
totally, I love that, and you're so right that building momentum, and first step is awareness. Anything we want to change, we first gotta understand and track, and paying attention what we eat. So what was a kind of, would you say, a common ingredient or a food item that people notice that causes the bladder issue?
Well, I'm trying not to overwhelm people with too much anatomy because sometimes it confuses them and shuts their brain off. So I'm trying to make it super just commonsensical. Is things that irritate not only you. So think about stimulants. Like what does a stimulant do? It stimulates you for some purpose. Well, it doesn't just stimulate your brain and give you energy, it stimulates your blood vessels, it stimulates the linings of things. Well, the bladder, the ureter, the urethra, those are all linings. So you're also stimulating those things. So you take, and now you're making things more hyperactive, right? all of us parents with kids is give your kid a bunch of red dye number whatever and try to put him to bed. Well, that's freaking impossible because you've just given him a stimulant and now you want him to sleep. It's like, well, how does that work? Well, think about the body. It's no different. So if you're giving yourself stimulants and you're saying, hey, my bladder is not functioning, and I'm giving myself coffee or tea or soda or bubble water, those are all things that are irritants. Well, and again, it's not we're always looking for one cause. It's not the whole cause, but it's a piece of the cause.
Yeah.
So, and that's where it goes back to watching the food is you watch the food and you notice, oh my gosh, I'm drinking these bubble waters. And people say, well, there's no sugar, there's no caffeine, but there's carbonation. And what that does is that's acidification, that's an irritant, okay, that causes spasm. Or I'm drinking tea and people say, well, green tea and black tea are good for me. Well, yes, there's certain parts that are good, but they also have tannins, and tannins break down mucus. And mucus protects linings. It protects your digestive tract lining, it protects your GI lining, your uteral lining, your vaginal lining. So you're breaking that down and now tissue is more irritating. Same reason why somebody might get gastric reflux or indigestion, right? So all of these little awarenesses start to notice, hey, I've removed tea and my stomach feels better. Well, guess what? Your bladder's also going to improve. So again, back to people is we like to make everything black and white, good, bad. And it's not good, bad. It's does it get me closer to where I want to go or does it get me further? And there's value in certain things, but like anything else is if we're taking several consistently doing it, it's going to create more and more problem. And that's kind of the first step. And then we talk about, okay, well, how then we rebalance the nervous system? So, North Americans are generally type A-ish in how they function. That means you got to go, you got to push, you got to wake up as early as you can, and you got to do, and go, and push. Well, the body, of course, is responding to that. So then that's where a big part of the mind comes in. Is if we don't develop a practice to calm down, I call it the hamster in our head, is then the body's responding to that hamster. So that's where the biofeedback process comes in of how do you set a small, consistent habits to start calming down our training. And a lot of the stuff that goes on between our ears, and I'll just reflect back to even when I was younger, when I talked about my knee, is we make these assumptions young, and they influence our whole life until usually a crisis occurs. In my case, that was a physical crisis that made me shift my perspective. And I'm grateful it happened, but it happens to all of us, right? So when we start having physiological problems, it's our body saying, hey, your current way of living isn't serving you. So you have two options. You can sedate it and medicate it and ignore it, and then it'll morph somewhere else later down the road. Or you can ask some questions and say, okay, well, how do I make some changes? And so back to my program is, it's not that it's so magical. It takes all of these things that we've talked about and put it into very simple step-by-step processes that give you the benefit of regaining bladder control. But oh, by the way, it gives you the benefit of preventing chronic disease, and it gives you the benefit of improved sleep or reduced inflammation, because they're all part of the same thing. Does that make sense, Irina?
Totally. You're so right that, building momentum and building this little step by step. And I love how you said it, that it took steps for you to become a negative. It takes the same kind of momentum and steps to get onto the positive side of things, and noticing with yourself when you start taking care of yourself and looking at it in a way that we all have the same amount of time and we gotta choose, do we wanna spend time getting ourselves healthy, or do we wanna in the future think of the time that we're gonna be sick? And it's those little things that you gotta do early on in life that kind of creates the foundation for your overall health. So totally get where you're coming from.
And just a side note, I just thought about this too, for us, single parents out there, is this also applies to parenting. So we're talking about our health right now and our bladder and just chronic disease, but it also influences, well, how do we raise a child who feels valued? how do we raise a child that might be in a situation of a household that's very different? How do you help them become adaptable but not internalized to make, so they become, mentally unhealthy? So it's the same type of thing. It's these little day to day. It's like, okay, do I spend all this time on my phone scrolling, or do I put my phone away so my child knows that I'm present with them right now? Right? It's all these little things that influence the big picture. So I guess it's not unique to health. It's
Yeah,
it's
yeah.
part of it all, right? So
So true.
kind of
So true.
interesting.
Yeah. What do you think is the most important trait to instill in a child?
I think the most important thing, and I don't have the answer for this, so I have,
Oh, just your perspective.
yeah,
There
I
is
have
no wrong answer.
four children, and I think I'm hopefully getting better as I've aged. But I think the biggest thing is to help them feel valued. I think a lot of issues come from insecurity, and insecurity comes from loss of value, whether that be just not heard. And I get we're all busy, and kids, especially when they're young, it's like, well, when's the time to sit and be super present, and when's the time where they just are delaying and being annoying, right? And that's a tough question to ask, but I think the big thing is feel valued and cared for. And you think of just as an adult, and I'm just speaking from a man's perspective, but knowing that I have a spouse and partner that stands behind me even when I screw up gives me a lot of strength to be able to push. If you don't have a foundation, and I think a child's the same way, is if you don't have a foundation of safety and security, I have your ability to step outside and push the boundaries to meet new people or to just interact in the world. If you don't have a safe place to come from, then everything is in question. So I would say value and sense of security. And I'll just reflect back to when I was a child, and I think back to this now. My greatest mentor was my dad, and he was like a rock. So I could always count on him, and it was pretty cool because it was like everything would always be okay because he was so dependable. And I know a lot of children out there may or may not have two parents. They might only have one, and that's perfectly fine. But I think the big thing that a child needs is security. Like, I'm safe, I'm okay, and I'm valued. So that's my 2 cents. Hopefully that helps.
Yeah, totally. No, Ellen, I love it. You're so right. Having a sense of security and having sense of stability, though, so when the life storms happen, that you're able to withstand them, survive them, and move overcome. Yeah, totally. Thank you. What is
Pleasure.
your superpower if you have to pick one?
My superpower is, and I'll just reflect back to our last discussions, is the ability to solve problems. And I have this endless curiosity. So I love to figure things out. And most importantly, I like to serve and help people. So you put those two together, and I think that's where my vocation came in. That's where my Ironclad Bladder Program came in, and just all the years of patient care. It's like I truly love people. I like serving, and I'm extremely curious. I just like to know and figure out. So that's a lot of stuff to put on your chest, but
Oh, but that's awesome. Having curiosity, it makes life more interesting, that you don't always assume. You stay curious, you stay open, and you stay flexible, and you know, and everything unfolds from there. So I
yeah,
love it.
thank you.
Was there any book that inspired your journey that you can recommend?
Sure. There's been several over the years, but I'll say two that kind of stick out would be Eckhart Tolle. He wrote a couple books, but the most notable for me was The Power, or A New Earth. It really kind of helps people understand themselves. And I think that's a big key is back to my observation is we've been conditioned to look for answers outside of ourselves. Like, this guru has the answer, that guru has the answer, this doctor or that. And yes, they might have some insight, which I agree with, but they don't have the answers. Most of the answers have to be self-discovered. You got to figure yourself out first. And Irina, I remember when you and I first met, you had mentioned that, you know, you were waiting for somebody to save you, and then you decided to save yourself. And I love that, because that's 100% true. Now, sometimes it takes people, 50 years to come to that discovery. Some never do. But kudos to you for looking at that and getting stronger. So that book, and then the next would be, it's called Christ Speaks His Truth, by the Recorder. They say that it's like a channeled book, and whatever it is I've read it and it makes a lot of sense to me. It helps put the Bible in a perspective that makes sense, because the Bible in some ways doesn't make sense to me, and that really helps make it sensible and reasonable, without a bunch of dogma and I don't even know, stuff that didn't make sense. So it made sense to me, and I read that regularly, and it really helps me understand mostly self, and it helps, instead of us looking for a savior, whether it be Jesus or otherwise, it helps us to look into ourselves and build our connection with our source. So, and whatever that source would be called to you doesn't really matter.
I love it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Is there anything I haven't asked that you would like to share?
No, I think the biggest thing I want to share is just like, we've been through some challenging times as single parents, and I've been through challenging times as a non-single parent. And I think one of the really cool things about just having these discussions is most people think that they're alone. They think that their problems are unique to them. And yes, they're unique to them, but they're really global. So the specifics are unique, but the generalities all of us go through. And just hearing the challenges, really, in my personal experience, it really helps say, hey, this is okay. This is part of the process. I can get through it. Versus the other way of people go is, why is this happening to me? Why am I being punished? What did I do wrong? Or whatever the reasoning is. There's no punishment or any of those issues. It's mostly just like connecting with each other helps us all kind of grow together, which I think is really special.
Totally. Yes. Thank you. If people would like to connect with you or learn more about you, where would they go?
They just go to my website. It's Dr. Nigel, Nigel Brayer, BRAYER.com. And there we have all sorts of cool information. There's menu plans, there's bladder hacks, there's all sorts of things to help them and their family and their children with bladder-based issues. Or they can set up a consultation with me to chat about something they have, and then they're looking for some insight in. So, yeah, everything's on that site, and they can reach out to me directly that way.
Thank you so much. We'll include everything in episode notes. It's been a pleasure to have you. Thank you so much for being open and choosing your vocation, choosing your career, and now helping others heal and feel better.
Thank you, Irina. I appreciate you.